I was treated as an outsider in my family because they preferred my brother. After I moved out and bought my own house, they tried to legally force me to give it to my brother. They lost the lawsuit and ended up owing me $120,000. I've been harboring this feeling for years, and I'm uncertain if I'm seeking advice or simply need to vent. It's complex to articulate, but deep down, I've always sensed a lack of genuine love from my family, at least not in the way one would expect. As the eldest sibling, now 24, with my younger brother Ryan at 17, our 7-year age difference might explain why we've never clicked. Reflecting on it, our relationship seemed to sour the moment he arrived. Even as a child, it was evident that my parents' lives orbited around Ryan. To them, he was the golden boy, whereas I felt like an afterthought. Initially, I dismissed these feelings as dramatic overreactions. However, looking back, the signs were unmistakably troubling. Take last Christmas, for example. While Ryan unwrapped a brand new PS5 complete with every conceivable accessory, I received plain white socks from Walmart. It wasn't about the socks, I could overlook that. The sting came from it being my sole gift, unwrapped under a tree surrounded by a family engrossed in Ryan's joyous frenzy. The house vibrated with excitement, all for him. There I was, clutching a modest sock package, forcing a smile while being utterly overlooked. Regrettably, this wasn't an isolated incident. It mirrored the pattern of my entire life. My birthdays have become a footnote. My last memorable celebration was at age 10. Since then, my birthdays have been either forgotten or outright ignored. On my most recent birthday, I celebrated with college friends since my parents didn't bother with as much as a text. Ryan's birthdays, in stark contrast, are grand affairs. For his 16th, they orchestrated a lavish celebration complete with a bouncy house and a magician, making it an event to remember for everyone but me. The house was decked out to the nines for his birthday. Every detail was meticulously planned and catered, making it feel like the Super Bowl of birthday celebration. And here's the kicker. I wasn't even invited. That's right, I was excluded from my own brother's birthday bash. I only found out about the party the day before, and when I brought it up to my parents, they casually dismissed it, assuming I wouldn't want to attend due to my academic commitments. So I spent the day with my friends, trying to distract myself, yet no matter how much fun we had, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being an outsider in my own family. When my own birthday came around this year, my expectations were low. Experience had taught me not to hope for much. Perhaps a small acknowledgement, I thought. But, as usual, nothing. My college friends threw a modest celebration in the dorms, which was genuinely enjoyable, but it still couldn't fill the void. Birthdays are supposed to be familial milestones celebrated with your loved ones, no matter how simple. Each of Ryan's birthdays served as a stark reminder of what I missed out on. Like his 10th birthday, which was an elaborate pirate-themed extravaganza complete with treasure hunts and costumes. When I turned 10, our celebration was just pizza, and even that felt like a treat at the time. The pain runs deeper than just missing out on parties or gifts. It's the persistent reminder that I am not the favored son and likely never will be. I've poured effort into being the ideal son, good grades, staying out of trouble, meeting all their expectations, yet none of it seemed to matter. Ryan, with his natural charm and athleticism, qualities I lack, has always been the golden child in my parents' eyes. I remember the excitement of getting a little brother, envisioning a future where we'd be close like the brothers in movies, playing video games, and hanging out. However, it didn't take long for me to realize that Ryan had no such interest in me. He was too caught up in his world of friends, sports, and the undivided attention he received. I felt like an afterthought, a mere placeholder in the family dynamic. As we aged, my resentment towards Ryan grew, though initially I don't think he intended any harm. However, it soon became clear he understood the sway he held. In our parents' eyes, Ryan was infallible. Any conflict between us, regardless of the circumstances, resulted in one outcome. I was at fault. Whenever Ryan erred, our parents would dismiss it with a chuckle, or worse, accuse me of not supporting him sufficiently. No matter the situation, I was painted as the villain. I recall an incident where Ryan and a friend were horsing around and ended up breaking the TV. Despite not being home at the time, Ryan accused me, and without a second thought, our parents sided with him. They grounded me for a month, confiscated my phone, and treated me like a delinquent. Feeling defeated, I withdrew further, spending more time alone in my room or at friends' houses, anywhere but home. Each return home served as a harsh reminder of my insignificance. My cramped, modest room stood in stark contrast to Ryan's, which was adorned with the latest tech and sports memorabilia. It was practically his own personal palace. My 18th birthday crystallized my place in the family. I had hoped for a semblance of recognition, especially since it marked my transition into adulthood. Yet, the morning of my birthday was indistinguishable from any other day. My mom was preoccupied in the kitchen, my dad buried in his newspaper, and Ryan absorbed in his gaming on his new Xbox. There were no birthday wishes, no presents, not even a simple acknowledgement of my existence. That moment cemented a painful truth. Nothing was going to change. Ryan had won. He had monopolized our parents' attention and affection, all seemingly without realizing the extent of what he had taken from me. Or perhaps he did realize and simply didn't care. My feelings towards him evolved into something far darker than typical sibling rivalry. True animosity. I found myself lying awake at night, tormented by thoughts of how much more peaceful my life might be without him in it. It might sound harsh, but this resentment has deeply rooted itself within me. Seeing Ryan only fuels a deep-seated anger that I struggle to contain. Living in the same house as him has become unbearable, and my attempts to express my feelings to our parents have been futile. They dismiss my concerns as dramatic overreactions or urge me to be more amicable towards him. But why should I extend kindness to someone who has, in my eyes, robbed me of a familial bond and sense of belonging? I feel trapped in a relentless cycle of bitterness and resentment, and I see no clear path to break free from it. I yearn for a sense of worth, to feel valued, yet, within the confines of this family, I am perpetually the runner-up. I'm at a crossroads. Perhaps it's time to sever ties, to confront Ryan about the pain he's caused, or continue distancing myself and try to forge a life independent of their shadow. It's been several years since I first shared my story online, and I never thought I'd return to this forum. I had hoped to leave that chapter of family drama behind permanently, but life often has other plans. The issues I thought I had escaped have only worsened, pulling me back into a saga more complex than I ever anticipated. After my last update, I took the necessary steps. I minimized contact with my parents. The persistent neglect and glaring favoritism towards Ryan were too much to bear. Moving out was my only recourse. I relocated to an apartment with some college friends, which significantly alleviated the emotional burden I had been carrying. Despite my challenges, I needed to sustain myself financially. I had always had a knack for graphic design, so I started picking up freelance gigs on Fiverr. Initially, it was just a means to make ends meet, but as I began acquiring more clients and earning a solid reputation, my efforts started to shape into a promising career. I dedicated myself wholeheartedly, working tirelessly through late nights and weekends. I was determined not to let my family's disregard define or restrict my potential. Then, amid my professional hustle, something incredible happened. I met Megan. She embodied everything I could ever desire in a partner: intelligence, ambition, and kindness. Like me, she was a freelancer, managing social media for small businesses. We connected instantly, bonding over our entrepreneurial spirits. We began collaborating on various projects, each supporting the other's growth. Megan made me feel seen in a way no one else had. She appreciated me for who I was, and her love was genuine, not born out of necessity or obligation. Together, we thrived, and as our careers prospered, so did our dream. About a year into our relationship, we decided to move in together, and our life only improved from there. Emboldened by our success, we dared to dream bigger and pooled our savings to buy a home, a significant 3-story house in the suburbs that was beyond our initial expectations, but became possible through our combined efforts. We were overjoyed. This house was a testament to what we had built together. Just days after closing the deal and becoming homeowners, the past resurfaced abruptly. I received an unexpected call from my mom. Reluctantly, I answered, bracing for the usual discomfort that accompanied our interaction. "Hey, honey, what's up?" She sounded cheerful, as if our strained relationship was nothing but normal. "We're in town and thought we'd stop by to see the new house," she added, pretending as if all was well. Realizing too late that I should have trusted my instincts, I had reluctantly agreed to let them visit. I thought perhaps it was time to confront the situation rather than continue avoiding it. So, when my parents, Ryan, and a woman I'd never seen before arrived at our front door a few hours later, I braced myself. The introduction of Ryan's companion as his fiancée, Karen, who was also visibly pregnant, was a shock. Not only had I been unaware of his engagement, but I was also now learning he was about to become a father. It was a stark reminder of how disconnected I had become from their lives. As soon as my father crossed the threshold, he began with passive-aggressive jabs. "Wow, this is the house you bought? Surprised you could afford something like this," he remarked with a disdainful sneer. I bit my tongue, unwilling to escalate tension. Inside, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Megan, sensing the underlying dynamics, exchanged puzzled looks with me as she endured my mother's forced small talk. Meanwhile, my father and Ryan spoke in whispers, and Karen nonchalantly inspected the house as though she already belonged there. Then my father delivered the unthinkable. "We've been thinking," he began with a patronizing tone, "since Ryan and Karen are starting a family and need space for the baby, it would make sense for them to move in here." The words hit me like a physical blow. "This house is way too big for just you and Megan," he continued, oblivious to my shock. He proposed that Ryan and Karen take over our home to raise their child, suggesting that Megan and I downsize. His audacity was staggering. "You're joking, right?" I managed, but the look in his eyes told me he was entirely serious. "No, we're not joking," he asserted. "It's time for you to step aside and let your brother have what he needs. After all, family comes first, and he's starting his own. You and Megan can find a smaller—" "Are you serious right now? This is our house. Megan and I bought this place. It's in our names. You can't just waltz in here and decide that Ryan gets to have it because he knocked someone up." Ryan, smirking with an air of entitlement, tried to interject. "Come on, man. It's not like you need all this space. You don't even have kids. We do." "That's not the point," I retorted sharply. "The point is, you don't get to just take what's mine because you think you're entitled to it. I've spent my entire life being sidelined for you, and I'm done with it." It was then that my dad's demeanor shifted dramatically. He stood up, chest puffed out as if to physically intimidate me. "Watch your tone, boy. You should be grateful we're even asking and not just telling you to hand over the keys. This house is going to be Ryan's whether you like it or not." In that moment, I saw red. Something inside me snapped. I lunged at him, pushing him back against the wall. "Get the hell out of my house," I shouted. Megan was trying to intervene, pleading for calm, but it was too late. Years of suppressed anger erupted as my dad and I exchanged blows, our shouts filling the air. My mom and Ryan were screaming, and Karen, caught in the chaos, frantically dialed her phone. It wasn't until the police arrived, presumably called by Karen, that the violence ceased. They separated us, handcuffed us both, and took us down to the station. Sitting in that holding cell, I was dumbfounded by the surreal turn of events. My own father was willing to displace me from my home for my brother, leading to our arrest. Megan bailed me out hours later, but the familial bonds were irreparably damaged. However, the saga didn't end with the police intervention. My father, ever persistent, decided to sue me for the house. He actually took legal action, arguing in court that Ryan and Karen needed the house more than Megan and I did, insisting that I should be legally compelled to relinquish it. The audacity of his claim was staggering. Armed with a lawyer and all necessary documentation to prove ownership, I prepared to defend my property rights vigorously. But I had an additional strategy. Over the years, the emotional and psychological abuses had accumulated, leaving a substantial trail of evidence. I collected emails, text messages, and testimonies from friends who had witnessed the unequal treatment I endured. Armed with this evidence, I was ready to expose the years of manipulation and favoritism in court. My attorney presented a compelling case, emphasizing not just my rightful ownership of the house, but also detailing the chronic neglect and emotional abuse I had endured throughout my life. I was no longer willing to be the silent, compliant son. It was time to assert myself. The legal battle was grueling, stretching over months, with my father deploying every conceivable tactic to tarnish my character. He portrayed himself as a caring father, merely trying to do what he believed was best for his family. Ryan and Karen positioned themselves as the victims, desperately in need of the house for their unborn child, framing me as the selfish sibling unwilling to accommodate. However, their narrative failed to sway the judge. When the verdict was announced, it felt like a monumental burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Not only was I affirmed as the rightful owner of the house, but the judge also recognized the severity of my grievances, ordering my father to compensate me $120,000 for the emotional and psychological damages inflicted. It was a profound moment of vindication. Finally, someone acknowledged my suffering and stood up for me. In the aftermath of the trial, I made the decisive choice to to sever ties with my parents and Ryan completely. The manipulation, deceit, and blatant favoritism were too much to bear any longer. Megan and I embraced our newfound solitude, focusing on reconstructing our lives together in the home we fought so hard to protect. Yet, the emotional scars from these tumultuous events remain indelible, occasionally resurfacing despite our efforts to move forward. Now, as I reflect on these past events, it's clear that my parents' inclination to undermine me hasn't changed. Ryan was always the favored son, the golden child, while I was relegated to the sidelines. But those days are in that bewildering moment as I confronted Ryan in my neighborhood, somewhere he had no reason to be. I was momentarily frozen. It had been years since we last spoke, and his sudden presence was shocking. "Ryan," I called out, a mix of confusion and alarm in my voice. "What the hell are you doing here?" But before I could grasp the situation, he charged toward me, an iron rod in his hand that seemed torn from a construction site. "What the fuck, Ryan?" I yelled, retreating, but he closed the distance quickly. He swung the rod with vicious force, and before I could react, it struck my side. The pain was immediate and intense, spreading through my ribs like wildfire. I doubled over, gasping for air, but Ryan was relentless. He struck again, this time targeting my legs. The rod connected with my left shin with a horrifying crack, and I collapsed onto the sidewalk in agony. "You ruined my life!" Ryan screamed, his voice breaking with rage. "This is all your fault. Dad went broke because of you. Karen left me because of you. Everything's fucking ruined because of you." I attempted to rise, to defend myself, but my body was unresponsive, overwhelmed by pain. Ryan stood over me, his face contorted with fury, and lifted the rod for another strike. I braced for impact, helpless and immobilized. The rod crashed down on my right arm, the bones snapping under the brutal force. Time seemed to slow, my vision blurred, and sounds around me became distant and muffled as if I were submerged underwater. I was unable to scream, only able to lie there, bracing for each subsequent blow, each one a potential end. The attack seemed endless, but eventually, I heard voices, distant initially, then increasingly urgent. Shouts filled the air, and footsteps hurried toward us. I vaguely saw figures grappling with Ryan, pulling him off me, but my consciousness was fading fast. When I next awoke, I was in a hospital bed with Megan at my side. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. I attempted to speak, but my throat was parched and my body throbbed with pain. "You're okay," Megan whispered, her hand squeezing mine reassuringly. "You're going to be okay." But the truth was, I wasn't okay. The physical wounds might heal, but the scars from this betrayal and violence would linger. A constant reminder of the deep-seated hatred and dysfunction that had torn my family apart. I was diagnosed with multiple fractures, my ribs, left leg, and right arm. The doctor informed me just how close I had come to a far grimmer fate. If not for the timely intervention of those bystanders, Ryan's relentless assault might have ended my life. He was arrested immediately, handcuffed, and taken away as I lay on the sidewalk, a bleeding heap of broken bones and shattered trust. The subsequent days melted into a hazy flow of pain and medication. I drifted in and out of consciousness, heavily sedated to manage the unbearable pain as my body tentatively started its long healing process. Through it all, Megan was my constant guardian, her presence a comforting constant by my hospital bed. She took charge of everything, the police reports, insurance claims, and even arranging for legal representation for the impending trial. Ryan faced serious charges, assault with a deadly weapon. The severity of my injuries meant he could be looking at substantial jail time. When I was sufficiently coherent, Megan briefed me on the situation. Ryan's mental state had evidently deteriorated after Karen left him. He had plunged into a severe depression, yet, rather than confronting his personal failures, he directed all his blame towards me. The police report was chilling. Ryan had admitted to staking out my house for hours, armed with an iron rod pilfered from a nearby construction site, meticulously planning his attack. What was even more disturbing was his lack of remorse. During his interrogation, he expressed a twisted sense of justification, telling the police that harming me was deserved, a form of retributive justice for the supposed ruin I had brought upon his life. He pinned every misfortune, his fiancée leaving him, our father's financial woes, squarely on my shoulders. My hospital stay stretched into weeks filled with physical therapy sessions, continuous medical tests, and the ever-present weight of the upcoming trial. Mobility was an ordeal. I was immobilized for nearly a month, and even after being discharged, I was dependent on crutches and a cast. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but they warned that full recovery might be a long road, and I might never completely regain the full use of my left leg. Several months later, the trial commenced. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Ryan entered a plea of not guilty. Ryan clung to a distorted belief that his actions were justified, that I had somehow driven him to the brink. His defense centered around claims of emotional distress, arguing that the turmoil within our family had destabilized his mental state. Yet, the evidence presented in court was overwhelming and unequivocal. Eyewitnesses recounted seeing Ryan attack me. They had intervened, called the police, and provided testimony that left little room for doubt. The medical reports cataloged the extent of my injuries in stark detail, and the police report outlined Ryan's premeditated nature of the assault. He had arrived at my home with a clear intent to inflict harm, and this reality was undeniable. The trial was an excruciating ordeal. Throughout the proceedings, Ryan avoided making any eye contact with me, as if erasing my existence from his conscience. But perhaps the most painful betrayal was seeing my parents there, not to support me, but to back Ryan. They sided with him, nodding in agreement as he painted himself as the aggrieved party, spinning tales of how I had supposedly wrecked his life. Their alignment with him felt like a continual betrayal, a confirmation of their unwavering preference for him, despite the glaring truth before them. The trial spanned several weeks, but the outcome seemed inevitable from the onset. Ryan was convicted of aggravated assault and received a sentence of 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. The verdict brought a sense of closure, albeit a hollow one, as I came to terms with the stark reality that the family I grew up with was no longer part of my life. In the aftermath, Megan has been my steadfast support, my constant through the storm. Her unwavering presence has been my foundation as we focus on rebuilding and healing, both physically and emotionally. I've begun attending therapy sessions to navigate through the trauma, to find a way to mend the deep-seated wounds inflicted not just by the physical attack, but also by the years of familial neglect and emotional abuse. It's a gradual process, one day at a time, as I learn to let go of the past and look towards a future where such pain is a distant memory. The days vary greatly. Sometimes I feel like I am truly recovering, making genuine progress. Other days, a glance in the mirror reflects back a broken, hollow version of who I once was. But there's one certainty in my life now. I will never let my family harm me again. They are a chapter firmly closed. Thank you for sticking with my story this far. Future is uncertain, but my focus is taking life one day at a time. Life is far from perfect, but understanding who I can truly trust is a treasure beyond measure, more valuable than any familial connection I once thought indispensable. Just as Megan and I began rediscovering normalcy, my nightmares receding, therapy bringing insights, and even discussions of starting our own family emerging, the unthinkable happened. It disrupted the delicate peace we'd been cultivating. Last week, Megan was supposed to join me for our regular lunch at a cafe near her office, a small ritual that had become our pleasant escape from the daily grind. However, she never arrived. Initially, I thought she might simply be running late, but as time stretched on without a word from her, anxiety took hold. Megan is punctual and communicative. Her silence was out of character and alarming. After waiting with growing dread, I tried to reach her by tech calls, to no avail. Panicked, I contacted her office only to learn she had left on time. My mind raced with horrific possibility. Had there been an accident? Was she hurt? Driven by fear, I started driving around, desperate for any sign of her. Then, a call from a blocked number interrupted my frantic search. Hesitant, I answered, half expecting a scam, but the voice on the other end was unmistakably my mother's, chillingly calm and deliberate. Your wife is with us. We're taking her somewhere safe, somewhere you won't be able to hurt her anymore. Stunned, I nearly lost control of the car. Mom, what the hell are you talking about? Where's Megan? What did you do? The surreal nightmare escalated as my father's voice then came through, accusing me of poisoning Megan's mind and turning her against her own family. They claimed they were doing what was necessary for her well-being. Their words, "We're taking her somewhere she can think clearly, away from you." The words from my parents were incomprehensible. They had actually abducted Megan, believing they were rescuing her from me, casting themselves as saviors in a delusional narrative where I was the villain. Somehow, I managed to keep my voice steady, though inside I was seething with anger. "If you don't bring her back right now, I swear to God, I'm calling the police." My father's response was a cold laugh, dismissing my threat. You think we're afraid of the police? We're her family, not you. She's better off without you. The scorn in his voice ignited a fury within me like never before. I ended the call abruptly and dialed 911. As the police worked to trace the call, the agonizing wait began. Every second was torturous, filled with horrific thoughts of what they might be doing to her, where they could possibly be holding her. After what felt like an eternity, the police called back with news they had located Megan. My parents had taken her to a dilapidated motel on the city's outskirts, locking her in a room under the guise of helping her realize she needed to leave me and return to them. True to her resilient spirit, Megan had managed to escape the room and sought help from the motel clerk, who called the police. By the time the authorities arrived, Megan was safe and my parents were arrested on the spot. They faced charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and several other offenses. The future they faced was uncertain, and frankly, I had no interest in what became of them. They had tried to sever the most important relationship in my life, driven by their warped perception. The ordeal has irrevocably severed any remaining ties I had with them. Their readiness to believe and act on their twisted views showed me they lived in a distorted reality where they saw themselves as heroes, and me, the devoted husband, as the antagonist. Looking forward, the path is unclear, but one truth remains steadfast. I am utterly done with them. Now Megan and I can begin to rebuild and move forward, focusing on healing and the strength of our bond. The trauma of the event will linger, but together we will navigate whatever comes, fortified by the ordeal we've overcome and the certainty of our shared future.